Time.
Awesome.
Okay, the official blip sound of recording. So, hey, everybody, thanks to Kevin for coming and doing the second presentation of the first day of the conference. Please note that the Google Meet chat is off for now. If you have any questions for Kevin, please put them in the Q&A, and we will throw those questions at him at the end of his session. Go for it, Kevin.
All right, great. So thank you, Debbie, for organizing this. Very much appreciate it. Always love your content. Super glad to be here and get an opportunity to chat with folks about something that is very important to me. So let me dive in. All right. So there's a lot of stuff on this that talks about who I am and what I've done in the past. That's all fine. And if it helps to provide like credibility or whatever, that's great. But who I really am is a person who's been in experience design since the mid-90s. And has held, pretty much every role you can. And why I'm here today, what I wanted to talk to you guys about kind of comes from that experience. And it specifically comes from many experiences of being a person on a team, working at like 3 o'clock in the morning. And I discovered somewhere along the line that I don't actually hate working at 3 o'clock in the morning. That's not the part of the journey that kind of upsets me or frustrates me. It's working at 3 o'clock in the morning on projects that I don't believe are going to have any real impact. And, it feels like a waste of time and a waste of life. And so I used that kind of realization early on in my career to start to look for ways to improve that for myself and improve that for others. And while we as experienced designers and product folks don't often get to say that we actually save lives with our work, I think pretty much every single day we can truthfully say that our work helps to save life. And what I mean by that is if you can design a system and make that system more useful or usable, chances are you're making whoever that user is more efficient in their task, which is giving them back more time and more life so that they can go do the things that they were hoping to spend their time doing and not whatever menial tasks probably that we're helping to facilitate for them. So long story short, that's kind of the passion behind what I do and how I've kind of continued to work to evolve my process. And that's kind of two different tracks, right? One track is about continuing to progress my career and get further and further up the food chain so that the work that I'm doing has more influence and can hopefully positively impact more people down the food chain, so that they spend less of their time designing and building things that aren't particularly useful. I don't want to have them doing that. So by being further up the food chain, I have more control over that. And then the other is just trying to inform as many people as possible about processes and tools that I use to help identify work that can be hopefully more impactful and kind of do that in a systemic way. Again, just trying to create as much positive impact as possible. So I will say that from my point of view, all of these things are tools. They are suggestions. I'm not terribly dogmatic about their use. And so I just invite you to kind of hear what I have to say today and then see if there's any piece of it that fits into a process that might be impactful for you. All right, moving on. So what are we going to discuss today? We're going to discuss the problem, like what I see as a big problem out there in the world, the potential solution, things that I have to offer from solutioning, like I said, over the past 30 years, trying to come up with ways to solve for this, and then how that solution interacts with the design process you're probably completely aware of and engaged with every single day. And so without much further ado, let's dive in. So I'll just say that the problem from my point of view is that very many companies are not actually that strategic in the work that they do. If they are strategic, they don't have a thoughtful process by which they are strategic. And if they happen to be strategic and thoughtful, then oftentimes silos and lack of communication skills prevent that high-level strategic thinking from making it further down the pipeline to folks that are oftentimes on product design and development teams who are doing the work. And that lack of either structured, thoughtful thinking in terms of strategy or the communication further down the pipeline, those things combine to create a lot of wasted time, wasted effort, and not work that goes out into the market and doesn't do particularly well. So I'd say that's the problem. From my point of view, probably the biggest thing that you can do to help solve for that is by having teams work together to define and document goals, strategies, and measurable objectives, and use that to drive the impactful work that your organization does. And then, like I said at the end, it's just really about trying to find a way to connect that high-level strategic work to the user-centered design work or whatever process you use to help empower the team to improve business outcomes and user experiences. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about that problem. So imagine you were conducting some research, and the first thing you notice here in the session with this person is that they don't look very happy eating their cereal. And the second thing that you notice is they're using a butter knife. So instead of a spoon, this person's using a butter knife, and they don't look very happy about it. We obviously, as researchers, would observe this and have an understanding of what's going on here. But companies don't often have great understanding of exactly what it is that's going on. And so imagine you're watching a follow-up session after the company has spent a year, a couple $1 million, and a lot of people's life in terms of their development time, their design time, their documentation time, all of that. And what you see in this next session isn't what you'd hoped for, right? Because probably as an experienced designer, you recognized pretty early that the butter knife was the problem, but it wasn't that the problem, that the butter knife needed to be made of better materials or that the butter knife needed to be designed better, right? And so, what this company did in this case is they designed the golden butter knife, right? They've created it out of the best possible materials. They had the best designers and engineers involved. And as you see in this experience, review, what you see is that the user's still visibly frustrated and they're still very inefficient at attempting to eat their cereal. So this example, it's pretty easy to see what's wrong. And so it's super easy to fix. But in the real world, working with product management and designers and developers, it's not always easy to see what's going on. And that's what's the challenge is for a lot of businesses, right? And so if businesses could see that they were creating the golden butter knife instead of what really needs to be done, what they might come up with is, that a simple plastic spoon that doesn't cost very much to develop or to deliver at all actually would improve the experience in this particular case drastically. And so that's kind of, a bit about what it is that I'm trying to help define a method to avoid going forward. And so some quick observations: this user's happier. Obviously, you can see that. So that's great. That's kind of, on the qualitative side. This user's time on task is shorter. So that's more quantitative. And then their error rate has been reduced. So just kind of trying to tie this silly, extreme example back to a little bit of the work that we all do every single day. All right. So if we kind of recognize that many times we as designers and product folks find ourselves in situations like this, we should be asking, why is that happening, right? Like, why do I keep running into the same challenge over and over again, right? And this study by the Sloan School of Management from MIT was able to identify that in the research study that they did, 1/4 of the managers surveyed could only list 3 of the company's 5 top strategic priorities. But the real kicker was 1/3 of the leaders in charge of implementing a company strategy couldn't list even one. And that's not just one company. That's happening all over the place. I see it all the time. And so what you end up with is, basically siloed leadership driving decisions about what work they want done in a way that is pretty haphazard. One group might be doing an amazing job of being very strategic. Another group might be very, off, from the hip and chaotic in their approach. And all this leads to this kind of confusion. So if we break that down a little bit more, why is that happening? Well, many leaders just frankly don't work strategically. In my experience, many are kind of impulsive. And they change their minds pretty frequently based off of limited information, that comes in from the sales teams or feedback from trade shows, things like that. But it might also just be pressure from the board of directors. A lot of times ends up creating direction, frankly, for the company. And so that's one reason. Most don't frankly know the difference. So unfortunately, just truthfully, if you ask a lot of leaders, they would struggle to explain the difference between a goal, a strategy, and an objective. Oftentimes these words all get thrown around interchangeably as though there's no difference. And again, that just doesn't help. That doesn't help people be able to communicate about these things in a structured way so that they can, work forward in a meaningful and constructive way. So that brings me to communication being a problem. Even if you're working together really well and you've come up with good strategy, if you're not communicating it well or if it's siloed and it's not in collaboration with other groups in the business, a lot of times your strategies can be conflicting. And then at the end of the day, profit and loss responsibility, P&Ls, creates counterproductive interdepartmental competition that oftentimes prevents cooperation and promotes like resource hoarding and things like that. So these are the high level things. We can't solve all of them, but we can solve some of them. So let's move on to that. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about how this problem manifests itself. On the left here, I just quickly called out quarterly losses from Meta's Reality Labs division. I don't think they could possibly have thought very strategically about what they're doing. And I do think that they're very very purposefully driving on a vision that they believe in. But as you can see here, by the billions they continue to lose, there doesn't appear to be the kind of traction that they were hoping for. And I think that this kind of thing that you see in business comes out of the issues that I'm pointing out. So you end up designing and building the wrong things, as I've said. Your work can get sideswiped at any given time by random requests for a new feature, A, B, C, or D, creating a lot of churn. And then the highest paid person in the room, or the one that's best at playing the Game of Thrones, gets to determine priority without others on the team understanding how this new priority will improve performance. And maybe they don't even understand. They just kind of have a pet project that they want to see move forward. So I can't really see your faces right now. I can't see how you're reacting to this. I'm just bringing these things forward based off of my personal experience. And when I talk to other designers, oftentimes I hear very similar things. All right, so what would a solution to this problem look like? Well, I always say useful, usable, beautiful, in that order, always. It's kind of a mantra of mine, and I've been teaching experience design for a long time, and it's kind of one of the first things I try to instill in new designers, because it helps to kind of illustrate this problem and break it down into smaller chunks so that we can kind of move forward constructively. So useful means that, what we're working on is likely to improve a business metric. And for a lot of new designers and seasoned designers, they get pretty disappointed when I say that that's kind of my definition of it. But in the end, my experience has been in my career that the business metric is actually what it's all about. Now, we say we're user-centered design, but we can't really design great experiences for users if there's no actual business outcome. We're not going to get to be in that business or have careers or feed our families very well if we continue to think that way. And so for me, it actually ends up boiling down to how am I going to positively impact a business metric and make users happy while I'm doing that, and consider the user and their happiness as a way of driving that metric. But at the end, the hard reality for me anyway is that if I'm not driving a business metric, I'm not driving much value. And if I'm not driving much value, I'm not going to be in my role for very long. So long story short, for me, useful comes down to that. I want to make sure that there's a strong understanding of what business metric we're driving, and then a strong understanding of the users and the needs that they have that fall into that space to make sure that we're meeting the goals on both sides. And to be honest with you, a lot of times when I talk to new teams that I join as a consultant, that they oftentimes don't even know exactly what metric we're trying to impact. So if you're in that boat, that's great. We'll talk more about that. But that's the high level one. First, let's make sure it's useful. If it's useful, the thing that we're doing is useful, then let's worry about whether it's usable, because it doesn't really matter if I've made the most beautiful thing in the world that's usable if it's not useful to anybody. So if we go in that order, right? My next one's usable. if it's likely to be useful, I'm thinking about content first. We talk a lot about mobile first. We hear that all the time. But for me, it's about content first. I want to make sure that the user has the content that they need to support them in whatever it is that they're trying to do. And then I want information architecture aligned with that content to make sure that it's structured in a way that is going to engage with the user. And then after that, I want to make sure that the interactive design is correct. And then moving on from there, beautiful. I want to make sure our visual hierarchy and our color and contrast and our fonts, and I'm way oversimplifying, but these are just high level concerns. But again, in this order is kind of the key for me. So today, I really want to focus on the useful part, because I think you guys probably really already know how to make everything usable and beautiful. But that useful part is oftentimes something that it's a little harder for us as designers to get connected to and to have a seat at the table. So let's talk about how we improve that. All right. So goals, strategies, and objectives is the high level framework and conversation that I want to kind of talk about and present today. So let's walk through some definitions, because like I said, I think a lot of people they use these words interchangeably and they don't really understand how they fit in together to work with each other. So at a high level over here, you see we've got a goal. This is the overall desired business and user outcome. And so in this template, I would be putting a goal right here, right where it says this is where the goal description goes. And then under each goal, you can have one or more strategies to try to meet that goal. And then that strategy is a high level description of an approach you want to take to try to meet that goal. And we'll get into deeper examples in a minute, but this is the high level structure of how these things work together. And then each strategy can have one or more objectives underneath that. And these objectives should be measurable. And what I mean by that isn't like necessarily a metric that you're going to track. It just means, did you actually do it? It should be measurable in that way. You should be able to say, yes, I actually did it. And if you can say that about each objective under a strategy when you're done, that means you completed that strategy. You tried that strategy out. Then you can look back at your metrics and say, okay, cool. Did that strategy actually positively move us towards our goal? Or did it not? And if it didn't, then you have to have some harder conversations. And if it did, maybe you can take what you learned from that, either just continue down that path or create other strategies that are related to it. But long story short, the key here is that in a very structured way, you can document you and your team's thought process on what ideas you had to solve for a goal. Those are your strategies. And then what steps you took along the way. So you can just measurably determine how well you executed against a strategy, and then whether that strategy was useful in moving you towards your goal. This is so important because so many times I see companies that are working on a strategy, if that's what they call it. Either way, even if they don't, they're working on a strategy to try to move towards a goal. But because they haven't done this part where they've broken it down in a concrete way to understand what it would look like to actually achieve that strategy, or completion of that strategy, they don't know. And so they just keep throwing more and more resource into that space, hoping to see a result because they expect it to come out, because that was one of their key strategies that they identified. But because they don't have a real formal way of talking about it or documenting it, they just don't even know. And so again, I see a lot of wasted time and churn in that space. So just calling this out as a high level way to start to think about and break down this higher level process in a way that you can work with your teams to be more purposeful about this. Some other really quick pieces to understand, those objectives, like I said, they're measurable. Either you did or you didn't do it. And this whole process is like a nesting doll. And what I mean by that is the president of a company or the president of a country is going to be looking at a much broader set of goals than, say, a director, or, if it was a military type thing, it might be a lieutenant or a sergeant. And so at the president level or the vice president level, an objective on their goal strategies and objective list could actually become a director's goal. And that director might take that goal and break that down with their team into strategies to meet it, and come up with objectives and all that to break it down further into the work that they need to do to try to meet that. So I just want to call that out because it's another important piece of this journey when you start working with bigger teams and bigger projects. Okay, so here's an example goal, strategies, and objective document. So on the left over here, we've got a goal. Again, high level, silly example. We're trying to escape a burning building unharmed. Okay, so let's say we're like on the 15th floor of a building, and we're trying to escape this building that is that's burning. We want to do that unharmed. That's our goal. And just like objectives, we either did or we didn't do this. So at the end of the day, we either got out of that building unharmed or we didn't, right? All right, so one strategy for that would be to use the stairs. And if we took that strategy and we broke it down into its measurable objectives, the first one would be check the doorknob in the hotel room, make sure it's not hot. Because if it's hot, we probably shouldn't go that way anyway, because it probably means the fire's right there. And if we open that door, we're gonna let a ton of smoke in and things like that. We get a whole different set of problems to deal with if that doorknob is hot. So our first objective is to check that. And we either checked it or we didn't. We know when this is done. So one of us runs over, we grab the doorknob, we check it, and it's cool. Great, cool. We can move on to the next one. Our next objective is to find the stairs using the map on the door. So we're looking at that map on the door that we never pay attention to when we go into a hotel room because, well, we're never going to imagine that anything bad's going to happen. But in this particular case, we're looking at that map real quick and we see, okay, cool. If I leave my room and I can't see very well, I know now that the stairs are at the end of the hall going to the right. Okay, cool. So that's my objective. So we leave, we make a right, we go down the hall, and we find the entrance to the stairs. We either do or we do not do that. If we did it, great. We completed that objective, we can check it off. Our objective 3, navigate. Oh, I'm sorry. Once we find the stairs on the map, the next one is navigating to the stairs. So we actually do that. So we navigate, we find them. Great. We check that one off. And then objective 4 is take the stairs to safety. So in this happy little story, we all make it down the stairs to safety. We can check this off and we can say, yes, this strategy worked great. Well, that works really, really well if it's a group of able-bodied people and nobody has any sort of issues that might have them in a wheelchair. If they did, we might have to change our strategy. But this is a quick example of how this framework works to kind of organize your thinking around what it is you're going to do. So just to cover again really quickly, the goal is measurable. You either did it or you did not do it. Each goal can have one or multiple strategies. Each strategy can have one or multiple objectives. And those objectives need to be measurable. Okay, so we talked about the fact that it's necessary, so I'll move on from there. Okay, so how do we connect this high-level strategy process to the work that we all do every day, right? And for me, it usually connects, in the old days, we call it personas and scenarios. For whatever reason, personas got this like negative connotation in our industry. And so I've started to use the word segments and scenarios because that closely matches kind of like how marketers think about things too. But at the end of the day, I like to, I almost never work as formally as this slide on the left shows where I've got like a little picture and I have the quote. That's kind of just, this is a presentation type persona and set of scenarios. Oftentimes I'm working in spreadsheets and I have a lot of the same sort of information, but on a high level, I've got a persona or a user segment, and I have their key motivations, pain points, and needs. And then I have like their key scenarios. How do they typically engage with a thing? And I have that knowledge in my head. And so we have different business units at PADI. PADI is the scuba diving organization that I work with. And so we have different business units and all different kinds of user segments that associate with each one. But in general, I have them in my head and I can refer to them formally when I need to. But in general, I have them in my head so that when I'm working with the team on goals, strategies, and objectives, I'm oftentimes thinking about how those segments and scenarios apply to the business goals that we're trying to solve for. And so for me, this is where these two things, connect the processes together. So if I worked in a vacuum and I came up with a list of goals, strategies, and objectives. Once I had high confidence that there was a strategy I wanted to execute on, I would start looking at those objectives and documenting whoever the segments were and what their scenarios are so that I could move that process forward. Likewise, if I already have segments and scenarios, when I start that goals, strategies, and objectives process, I like to connect them directly and kind of be thoughtful about that. But either way, it's a give and take. The process kind of can push or pull. For me, these two documents, the goals, strategies, and objective document and my segments and scenarios documents, are like very heavily interconnected. And I use them to then connect that high-level strategy process back to the user-centered design process. And so, the last bit to take away from this slide is just that knowledge is power. You, in your role, regardless of whether you are, considered a user experience designer, or if you're considered a director, or if you're considered a vice president, whatever, knowledge is power. And you and the product team are probably the people in the organization that have the closest connection to the data about how your customers actually feel and how they actually interact with your products. And so if you don't have a seat at the table, and by the table, I mean the strategic table, then you're going to have to find ways to try to influence it anyway. And the way that I found best is to use that knowledge that I have about the customer to continue to push for the meaningful impact that I'm trying to achieve. All right, so another quick note here. You don't need to be fancy. You don't need to use a Figma template like the one that I created. You don't need to, to do anything terribly fancy. I have spreadsheet versions like this one that I created many years ago. It's actually pretty poorly done, but it works. For other companies, I've created Google Docs and just put it in there, or Word docs, things like that. You do not need to be fancy. So that's the key thing to take away. You can start today, and that's probably the most important thing. Just start doing it. Start to see where this process either works or doesn't work for you. Tweak it till it works for you in the best ways possible. But don't let anything be a barrier. Just do it immediately. And then as you get more traction with it, it's working for you, continue to evolve it for yourself. All right. And then finally here, knowing when to quit. That's one of the biggest advantages of this process. Apple, with their Vision Pro, could have used this process more strategically to have a better sense of when to quit on the Vision Pro before they spent the billions it took for them to get the manufacturing pipelines and everything else set up. And Ansel Adams has this great quote that's down the bottom here. There's nothing worse than a crisp image of a fuzzy concept. When you're not meeting real user needs, you're probably not going to move real business metrics. And this process really helps you break that down and have thoughtful conversations between teams. And so that's another big reason why I wanted to share it. If you can kill bad ideas early in the process, you save everybody time and life. So that's my presentation. That's the high level, of everything I kind of wanted to cover with you guys today. I'm going to stop sharing and then see if we have questions.
Yes, we do. We have a bunch. I will read them out to you. Reminder, everybody, the chat isn't working right now. We'll be fixing it later, especially when Tom joins us. And first, Deanna and I want to mention that we love your Ted Lasso Believe poster behind you. Thanks for that. Vic's got a question. Hey, Kevin, have you ever encountered a challenge where a functionality is fast-tracked into design while research is still incomplete because the dev team is running out of work? Is this work churn? Any recommendations for thoughtful product designers in this environment?
Yeah, that happens, I think, all the time. And I will just say, just because I have a presentation and some history in this stuff doesn't mean I do it right all the time. I don't find myself in those same situations. So yes, I run into that all the time. I'm running into it right now as we speak. But I do try to use this structured approach. At Patty, I've been very successful in getting the goals, strategies, and objectives process in place. So that part's good. I haven't always been successful in getting everybody to use it to drive decisions. But it is good to be able to point back to, right? And be able to say, hey, look, we agreed that this was the thing we were intending to do as a business. We agreed these are the 3 strategies we were going to approach. And so we aligned all of our sprint work based off of these objectives. And so we're actually doing that work right now. And so when someone comes to me and they says, hey, we want to introduce this new thing that we just got from a trade, so it's the hottest thing since sliced bread, I say, okay, cool. Can you help me understand how this new thing is going to better move that business metric? Right? And if the person can say, it's going to move the business metric faster than these other things we're currently doing, and here's how I believe that. If we as a team also believe that, then great, we can get behind that work. We can engage with that. We can be okay with getting our sprints sideswiped, and we can make that change. On the other hand, if the person can't come back with anything meaningful or concrete, I have actually seen it where that person says, that's actually a really good question. And no, I don't think I want to sidetrack the work that we're doing. I think all that other stuff is actually really important. Can we put this in the backlog and we'll revisit it later? And then the answer is yes to that question. So that's the positive side that I have seen happen. I have also seen the negative side where, we go through all that logic and we build up the arguments, and unfortunately we still build the thing that we don't believe in. But that's part of the reality of what we do, and that's just life. Yep, exactly.
Yeah, little crying on the inside clown. We've got a few more questions if we can keep you a little longer. Jess asks, brilliant summary of everything wrong with many companies, their lack of strategies and shifting priorities. Concretely, how are you getting the snowball rolling to spark change in the organization and inspire others to set goals better? Bottom up on your project team?
Yeah. So frankly, it was bottom up. I mean, I can't complain. I'm a vice president, right? So I obviously have a lot of say in the organization and how we do things, but that doesn't mean all the other vice presidents or the C-level folks are going to listen or do what I want them to do, right? Or hope to do. What I will say is that Patty, unlike some other companies I've been at, the leadership is very thoughtful, and has been really great at being team players. And so, they may not have adopted every single piece, but they really are kind of taking the spirit of this goal, strategies, and objectives. They're taking the spirit of transparency, being able to have these conversations across the teams and be able to identify those things. So it's been pretty impactful in that way. And I think it's been a positive change, even though not everything I was hoping kind of would fall out of it has. But I've been at other companies where, of course, you've got some people don't want to play. They don't see it as a team sport. They see themselves as, if they do see it as a team sport, they are the pitcher or they are the quarterback, and they don't want to take that sort of input. So it's an ongoing struggle. But having some logic and structure behind the conversation are like tools like water to kind of continue to wear down and erode those sorts of problems. So it's that's my positive look on sometimes those frustrating situations.
We've got 2 more questions. I'll do JB's first. It says, in your goal, strategy, objective framework, where do you fit the problem statement? I find it key to anchor my team's work with a problem statement to pull everyone back to an objective mission we're working on together.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's a really great question. And that's kind of, I think in the question, you kind of said it, that objectives, so, like that problem statement and objectives. A lot of times, if I come out of a strategy session where we go through the GSO and we kind of go through this, these are documents that improve over time, right? The high level ones almost never are completely accurate. But as we break those high level strategies down, what I try to do is say, hey, look, as a business, we've identified, here's just a key example, right? At one company I worked at, it was pointed out to me by one of the senior leadership that if we could get the users to behave in a specific way, our average order value went through the roof, right? And so that was the high level thing. It was like the business problem was we wanted our average order value to go up. That was the metric we were kind of looking at. But to break it down further, we said this user behavior, right, was the thing we were trying to target in specific. And so, the goal was improve our order value. One strategy was change this, promote this user behavior. And then the objectives became, how do we then break that down? So for me, it's about kind of tying in the problem statement into which part of that it depends, but oftentimes it's like the strategies to say, like, look, this is the problem, and this strategy is the problem statement, and then here are the objective things we're going to do to try to achieve that.
Excellent. We've got one more question, then we'll let you go.
Okay,
Ian
thanks.
has a question, and then he added context to it, so I'm going to read you both. Ian says, how to measure objectives that can't really be measured? For example, The strategy ends up being putting out fires, so objectives get reshuffled. There's no data by which to measure objectives. It might take years to get the data to measure meaningful objectives across service product lifecycle. KPIs become the goal. So how do you measure what can't really be easily measured?
Yeah. So I want to make sure I'm not sure if I've run into an example like that. So I don't know if I have a really great answer to that question. I would say that what I normally am looking for the objectives, those are literally the measurable steps. And I can usually measure those pretty clearly, right? Because I can usually say, hey, did we redesign the landing page? Did we improve? Did we change the way that people are interacting with this specific piece of content? I can say, yeah, we did or we didn't do that. Now, the result of that is the part that's oftentimes hard to measure from my point of view. So I'm not sure if I'm answering this question well. But the result of that, or the time it's going to take to measure the result of that, might make it difficult. So then I'm trying to find indicators. What kind of indicators might we see? And that will go back to time on task, error rates, those sorts of things. Just smaller, like it could be micro conversion, that sort of stuff.
Yep, totally agree there. Okay, we're gonna wind down a little bit so we can take about 10 minutes break before we join the next adventure with Marvin. I'll have to check if he's here, but for now I'm gonna stop the recording and say, Kevin, thank you so much again for a great presentation.
All right, thank you folks, it was great to be here. Take care.